Welcome to this comprehensive video course on JavaScript testing with Jest, a powerful and widely used testing framework. This course covers Jest's features and capabilities and will teach you how to write, run, and organize tests efficiently to enhance your JavaScript projects. Popular teacher Tomi created this course.
Hi there, and welcome to this course. I am Tomi from freeCodeCamp. In this course, you will learn how to use Jest to test your JavaScript code. Jest is a powerful testing framework for JavaScript, and in this tutorial, we will cover everything from the basic concept to mocking and also asynchronous testing. By the end of this course, you will have the skills to implement Jest into your projects confidently. Now let's get straight into this course. So now the first thing that we're going to do is to create a folder where we're going to be doing all our work. So right now I'm just in the root directory of my computer. I'm going to go into Document, and in there I'm going to go into my projects folder. And I'm going to create a new, I'm just going to create a new directory named, so I'm just going to say mkdir Jest course. And I'm going to go into Jest course. Now if I press ls to see everything in this folder, you're going to see that it's blank. So what we're just doing is kind of like creating a playground where we can experiment and see Jest in action. So this is just the folder right here. And as you can see, I named it Jest course. You name it whatever you want to name it, and yeah. So now the next thing that we're going to do is to just like initialize a new npm project. So what I'm going to do is that in here I'm going to say npm init. So this is the normal command you use to just initialize a new project, but I'm going to add -y. Now the reason why I add -y is like a shortcut to answer yes to all the prompt. So once I run npm init, if there's any prompt that is going to come up, once I put -y right here, it's just going to bypass all of that and answer yes. So we can have like a default setup and also like a quick setup. I'm going to hit enter. And now that is done. If I press ls again, you can now see that we have a package.json file right here. So what I'm now going to do is to open up this Jest course folder inside my VS Code. I'm going to swipe to VS Code right here. And what I'm just going to do is to say file, open folder. And then I'm just going to look for my VS Code right here. So right here I'm just going to try to find my projects, test course. I'm going to open this up. So right here, as you can see, we have opened up Jest course, and this is the package.json that we have right here. Just a normal npm project. So now what we're just going to do, the next thing that we're going to do after doing that is to now actually install Jest into this particular project. So for us to install Jest, what we're going to do is to run npm install 2 hyphens, we say save, then dev, and then Jest. So the reason why we're choosing Jest again is just for its simplicity and its rich features. So Jest is like, I think, the most popular framework library that we can use to run JavaScript tests, and that's why we're using Jest for this course. So this is the command that you're going to use to actually install Jest into this project that we just created. And now what I'm just going to do is to click on enter, and that is going to start installing Jest into this project. Now, as I said, it's going to install Jest locally into this project, and it's going to add it to the dev dependency in our package.json. If I come here, once it's done, you're going to see something named dev dependency, and that just means that it is this particular library that we're installing is essential for the development of these projects, but is not essential for running the actual application. So you don't really need to know all of those details. What you just need to know is that what we are running right now is to install Jest into this project. And now once that installs, you're going to see a new folder here is going to be created named node modules. As you can see, that was created. But let's wait for it to properly install. Now, as you can see, everything was installed successfully. It added Jest, so it says added 292 packages and found zero vulnerabilities, which is what we want. Now, if I come back in here, let's verify that this installation actually worked. So now we have a package lock.json, and then we have the actual package.json. So first, if we come in here, you can see that we have a node module folder. This means that we actually installed a particular library or a module. in this package.json, once I come in here, the dev dependencies I was talking about initially, this is it right here. So once this has been added, under here you can see that we have jest added to dev dependencies. Now this just confirms that jest has been added successfully, as you can see. So now that jest has been added successfully, the next thing is to actually configure our npm script to run jest when we want to execute tests. So what we're going to do is to just open up package.json and change some stuff. So npm scripts are convenient shortcuts we can set up to run specific commands. So we're going to set one up now for jest. Now I'm going to open up package.json, and right here, this is package.json is like our project manifest. So let's just modify it to run tests using jest. Now on here, what we're going to do is where we see, if I just come here, where we see tests, so under script, under the script section, so this default text, we're going to change it to jest. We're going to say jest, right? And then what this does, this means that whenever we run the command npm tests, it's going to use jest to execute that test. Now this is what we want to do. We're just going to save this. This is what we need to do. And then now with our setup ready, we can dive into jest and dive more into how we can actually run tests using this jest. Now let's go into the basic concepts of testing with jest. So now that we have set up jest and we have everything done, the next thing that we want to do is to write our first test. So this is going to introduce us to the fundamental concepts in jest. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to write a very simple unit test, and before we move forward, let me explain what unit test is. So unit test is the process of checking small pieces of code to deliver information early and often. So when we are testing, when we are doing or running a unit test, it means that we are testing small blocks of code. So things like basic functions or basic classes, that is unit testing. Now the reason why we do this is so that we can easily identify errors or any bugs that is going to come up right from the scratch, so that instead of testing the whole code when it's done, and that is going to be harder because once we get an error, it's going to be harder to actually find where the error is coming from. But unit test allows us to easily get or catch all this error early on while we're still, doing our basic functions and basic coding blocks. Now we're going to run a basic unit test using jest, and let me show you how to do that. Now the first thing we need to do is I'm just going to close this, and right here I'm going to create a new file named sum.js. Now this sum.js is actually a JavaScript file where we're going to be writing a function that is just going to add two numbers together and return the addition or the sum of those numbers. And I'm going to create another file named sum.test.js. Now this is a test file. So once we write the actual function in here, we're going to kind of like export that particular function, and we're going to retrieve that function in this test file, and then we're going to actually run the unit test. So now what we're going to do is to come back in here, and right here in sum.js, I'm just going to write a basic JavaScript function. I'm going to say function. I'm going to name it sum. Just increase this a little bit, and I'm going to say it's going to take two inputs, A and B, and we're just going to open and close that function, and that function is going to return the sum of those two numbers. So it's going to return A plus B. Now the next thing we're going to do is to actually export this particular function so that it can be used by other files in this particular directory. So what I'm going to do is to say module.export equals to sum, and I'm going to add my semicolon, very important. Now that I have all of this done, the next thing I can just do is to actually run a test. So the first thing I just did is just creating this basic sum function, taking two inputs, and it's going to add those inputs and return the value or the sum of those inputs. Now I'm going to make, as I said, using this module.export equals sum, it makes this sum function available to other files like this test file in Node.js right here. So now I'm going to access this particular function in this sum.test.js, and I'm going to run a unit test right there. But now what I'm going to do is to just explain how this works. So as I said, we're using jest, and when we say sum.test.js, once we add .test before adding .js, JavaScript automatically knows that we're trying to run a test. So it knows that this is a file dedicated to running tests. Now what we're now going to do is to say const sum. So what I'm doing is I'm using require to import this sum function into this test file. So I'm going to say equals to require, and I'm going to say ./sum. Now this imports it into this particular folder file, and now I can actually run the test. So I'm going to say test, not this. I'm going to say test, and now this is going to be a description. So this comes in two, so it has like a pair. So once we run test and we have a bracket, I'm going to have right here, I'm going to write the description. So I'm just going to say description, and right here after the description, I'm going to have like the test function. I'm just going to leave it like this, and we're going to come right here to now add an actual description. So what is the description of this function? So what are these tests that we're going to run? So we're going to say it adds 1 plus 2 to equal 3. So what we're going to do is that we're going to run a test by giving, so I'm going to come back in here. So we're going to give it these values of 1 and 2. And when we add 1 and 2, theoretically, this function should return 3 because it's just adding 1 and 2 and it's giving us 3. And that's what we're going to say in here. So the description is saying it adds 1 and 2 and it should equal 3. And then after having the description, now we're going to have the actual function. So to have the actual text function, so we're going to come here and do this like this, and equals to the greater than sign. Then we're going to open a function, and then we're going to say expect. So expect sum. Now we're going to use that function 1, and we're going to give it 2, 1 and 2, and we're going to say to be. So this is like another pair, and it's just saying once we run this 1 and 2 function, the answer should be, or the response should be 3. And then we're going to have our semicolon to close this, and we also need to come here and close this. Now this is all we need, and let me just quickly explain this particular code once again. So now what we're just doing is we are importing this sum function from here so we can run tests about that function, and then we are basically introducing this test right here, which is like a global case for defining a test case right here in this test function. And this structure, which is the description, and then we have the actual function right here. And the last thing is that we did is to input the pairs. So we have the expect and to be pair. So as I said, expect means we expect that once we run this sum function and give it these values, the response should be 3. Now what we need to do is to now just run the test. So for us to run the test and get the results, we have to save these 2 files, make sure they are saved, and then we're going to pop up a terminal right here, and then all we just need to do is to make sure we're in this folder. Yes, we are. So let's just clear that, and now we're going to say npm test. So as you can see, that test didn't go through. It says echo error, no test specified. So that means there is a problem when we set up our package.json. I'm just going to close this up and close that. So right here where we have script jest and we say all of this, so as you can see, it's basically giving us this error message. That is what was given to us right here, no test specified. Now this is because we replaced the test with jest instead of the actual value. So this should be test, the key should be test, not jest, and then the value should be jest. So we just need to rectify that error, and once that is rectified, we can close this, open up that terminal again, and now we can say npm test, and let's wait for that to run. Good. As you can see, it says 1 test is passed, 1 total, and as you can see, 1 passed, 1 total. So it ran 1 test in total, and out of that 1 test, 1 was passed. So basically everything that was run was passed. And snapshot 0 total, and this was the time it takes to run the test. And as you can see, this is the main message we are looking for: pass sum.test.js it adds 1 plus 2 and it equals 3. So as you can see right here, we have successfully run our first unit test, and this is how we can use Jest to easily run a test or unit test right here in JavaScript. So what we just did was to create a simple function, and then we wrote a test for it and ran that test. Now I'm going to emphasize how understanding this foundational concept is crucial for writing more complex tests. So this seems like a very easy and the most basic test you could write, but it's actually crucial and important that you understand how to write basic tests like this before you can go ahead and actually run more complex and advanced tests. So we're going to be talking about matchers in Jest. And matchers are just used to test different type of data. So they basically let us assert values in different ways. So right here, this is a matcher, this to be right here. So when we have the function or the test function, this is the test description. Right here we have the test function. So we have the expect, and then we have the matcher. So this to be is one type of matcher. There are various type of matchers. There is to be, to equal, to truthy, to falsy, to true. Now I'm going to talk about every single one of these right now. The first one I'm going to talk about is to be, and that is what we already shown you in the initial example that we did. Now, as you can see right here, what this is just to be, and we're saying sum 1 plus 2 to be 3. So what we're just going to do is to get rid of this, and I'm just going to start again and show you how the to be matcher actually works. So what I want to show you is to be is basically used for primitive values. So values like numbers, strings, and booleans. That's what to be is for, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So now let's just quickly write a simple test, but we don't need to import any function from sum.js. We were not really going to be working with this file for now. We're just going to be doing everything from here because I'm just showing you basic examples. So description, we're going to say 2 plus 2 is 4. And then right here, we're going to have open and close bracket. And then we're going to have to open a function. Now we're going to say expect 2 plus 2 to be 4. Now, what this to be is going to do, if 2 plus 2 is 4, then it's going to tell us the test has been successfully passed. But we only use this to be when, as I said, when we are dealing with values like numbers, strings, and booleans. So this is a number. If it was a string, if it was anything dealing with string or booleans, we're going to use to be also. Now, if I open up my terminal, let me just make sure we save this. Let's bring back that terminal. Just going to say npm test again. And this is going to run successfully. It says 1 passed. Now, that is how we use to be. Right? Now the next thing that we're going to talk about is to equal. So to equal is used when comparing the values of objects or arrays, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create basically a new dictionary in here. So let's just say test. Let's create another one, and let's say something, move this, and let's say something like object assignment. And close, and right here we're going to create a new dictionary. We're going to say data equals, and we just say 1 hyphen 1, right? And then right now what I'm just going to do is to say data 2, just giving it another value, equals to 2. Now we expect that the values of this data dictionary now should be 1 colon 1 comma 2 colon 2, because we added a new key value pair, which is 2 and then 2, right? So that's what we expected. But in this case, we're not going to say to be. So I'm going to say expect data. So we expect this data now that we created here. We're going to say dot to equal. So we expect it to equal. Now we can just type in what we need, 1 colon 1 and then 2 colon 2. So this is what we expect it to be. Gonna keep this spacing, add the semicolon, and come down here and add the semicolon. So now I'm not going to say we expect this to be this, because we are not like directly dealing with primitive values like numbers or strings. This is an object basically. So because we are dealing with object or arrays or anything like that, then we have to say to equal. Now what we're just going to do is to come up here, and then we're going to say npm test again. And because everything should be working successfully, it says 1 passed, 1 total. Now, as you can see, what this basic JavaScript code does is we're creating this new object named data, and then we're now inputting another value in there as 2 colon 2. So now the total value of everything that should be in data should be equals to this. Because it is equals to that, that's why that particular test was passed successfully. Now we've talked about to be and we've talked about to equal. Now the next matcher we're going to talk about is the truthy and falsy matchers. I'm just going to demonstrate how to test for truthy and falsy values in Jest. So the first thing we're going to do is to test for truthy values. No, we're going to test for falsy values, the first thing. So when we're testing for falsy values, so the way we test for falsy values is just the way we say to equal. Right here, we're going to say to be falsy. And this doesn't really work in this situation, but we're going to change that. So I'm just showing you how you're going to test for it. So I'm going to write a code now that is going to test that we're going to have to use this to be falsy. Now we just used falsy to check if a value is null, undefined, if it's false, if it's 0, if it's blank, if it's NaN, or as I said, undefined. So that is what we use falsy for. And let me show you an example. So let's just start test. Go back. And we're just going to say no is falsy. And then like this goes to, and now let's say const n equals to null. So n is null, and then we're going to say expect n dot to be falsy. So because n is null, we expect it to be falsy. So this test should be run successfully. As I said, to be falsy is used to check if a value is null, undefined, versus false, 0, blank, or NaN. Now because this n is null, this test should be true and it should run successfully. So now let's pop up that terminal once again, and then let's run npm test, hit enter. Let me expand it. You can see it has been passed successfully. Now this just shows that to be falsy worked. Now on the other hand, the next thing that we can check is to be truthful, to be truthy. So before we go there, I'm just going to show you one more thing. So as I said, this is not just only for when n is null. If n is 0 or n is false or n is any of those other values, is going to also be true. So let me say 0 is falsy. So I'm going to give this a value of 0. Now n is 0. So now we're expecting n to be falsy. I'm going to save it. If I run that again, npm test, you're going to see that that runs successfully. Now, as I said, the next thing we're going to do is to check to be truthy. So what we're just going to do is I'm going to show you how we use to be truthy to check or to test if a value is like not any of this. So basically, if a value is not falsy, it is truthy. So we say this is 0, but if I say 1, because that is not falsy, and I say to be truthy right here, and then what I can just do is to say 0 is 1, it's truthy. Now this should run successfully. If I come up here and say npm test, 1 should be truthy, and we say 1 passed. Now if I change this back to falsy, so you just see that it's not every time that it actually passes. If we make a mistake, it's not going to pass. Now once I run this, you're going to see it says 1 failed, 1 total. This is because to be falsy should only be true or should only be successful when the value of n is basically any of those values, 0, false, undefined, null, or any of those stuff like that. Now the last thing that we're going to be talking about in matchers is error handling with to throw. So what we use error handling for is just to determine whether a function throws an error, and just the way we have to be falsy, to equal, and all of that, we have to throw for checking error matches. That's what we, for checking errors, basically that's what we use that for. Now I'm just going to show you how to use this practically. So for us to basically use this practically, what we're going to do is to write our own test again. And once we write the test, I'm going to show you that once a particular error is thrown or an invalid input is thrown, then it should give us that error. So the first thing I'm going to do is to make sure that you understand the to throw. So the to throw, so it's going to say like this, to throw. That's what this is. And as I said, it's used for error handling. So error handling is a very essential aspect of testing in JavaScript in general. So particularly when you expect a function to throw an error under certain conditions, and it should throw that error. That's why we want to test to make sure those errors are being thrown. Now, as we are using jest in here, it provides us this to throw function, so we can use this for this purpose. And this basically helps us write tests that verify whether a function throws an error when it is called. So for the to throw specifically, so this matcher in jest is used to test that a particular function throws an error when it is executed, just as I said. Now this is particularly useful when you're testing functions that are designed to validate input and throw errors when the input is invalid. So let's do that right now. So I'm just going to write a basic syntax of how to use this to throw, and we're just going to say test, nope, and then we're going to say throws on invalid input right here, open and close, enter. Now we're going to say expect, and then what we're just going to do is after expect, we basically want to have something that throws an error. So right here, what we need to do, say, open one up in here. So we want to do this. Actually, we don't, because we already have. So right here in expect, we have open and closed. We need to make sure the syntax is correct. So we open this and have another one in here. This. Now we can hit enter. And then we could just say, for now, let's say my function invalid input, and then dot to throw right here. So in this example, my function is a function that we are testing. An invalid input is some input that is expected to basically cause the function to throw an error. So what we need to do is to write an actual function for this my function. So what I'm gonna do is to say, I'm gonna save this. We could write that function in here, or we could, write it outside and just import it in here. So what I'm just gonna do is to write a function, I'm gonna write another function, and I'm gonna name it my function, and it's just gonna take an input. So we're just gonna say if input is invalid, we're going to take care of how to get if the input is invalid. So if the input is invalid, what we want to do is to basically do something in here. We're going to throw here, right here, throw new error. We're just going to say invalid input. So how do we check if the input is invalid? So we'll say if type of input is not equals to a number, that means in this case that input should be invalid if the type of the input is not equals to a number. So what we're just going to do is, since this type of input is not equals to a number, then that should be invalid for us, and we're just going to have to export this particular function to just the way we exported the sum function initially. Just going to export that, and then right here we're going to come back to Jest, and we're just going to say const my function equals to require the slash sum. We're going to say my function. So now we can use my function in here because we've already imported it from here. So we exported this. We don't really need this. We could get rid of all of this, and we could save this. Just make sure we're copying this correctly. My function and my function. So now we can basically use all of this, and what this does is if the input is invalid, then it's not going to work. So what we're going to do now is that right here in sum.js, so this invalid input, we don't really have any value we're giving it, so I'm just going to give it like a string, and let's save it. Now let's open this up, and then let's say npm test, and let's see, and it failed, and let's see why it failed. It said throw mod not found. Now this is because right here we're getting the sum file, so this is saying ./sum.js basically, and then we could give it my function. So now let's run this again. So the mistake we made was we changed sum to my function, and when we changed sum to my function, there was no any file here named my function, so it gave us an error. But now we got this my function from right here, from ./sum, so that should work. So as you can see now, it passed. It says throws on invalid input. Now because that input is invalid, it throws that error for us because we are expecting a number. But now let's say we actually put a number. Let's save it and then run npm test again. So now as you can see, it said one failed. Now why does one fail? This is because this is not actually an invalid input. This is a very valid input, because for it to be invalid, it needs to be not a number, but this is a number, so it's not going to throw an error. That is why that failed. So that is basically a summary of matchers in Jest, and that is why we use matchers, and why matchers is actually very powerful in testing in JavaScript in general. So now we are going to be testing asynchronous code in JavaScript. So testing asynchronous code is quite complex, and is not as straightforward as testing normal functions that we've been talking about and writing this whole course. So I'm going to show you how we're going to be able to test asynchronous code, and it's actually quite vital and important that we know how to test asynchronous code, because asynchronous code is used a lot in JavaScript and is very important. So let me just show you how Jest makes this straightforward. But before we do that, let me just quickly explain the concept of asynchronous code. So asynchronous code in JavaScript allows for executing some operations in the background and not blocking the main execution thread. So this is crucial in JavaScript, especially in web environments, because it keeps the user interface responsive while handling tasks like networks, requests, file operations, or timers. So there are different ways that there are different free methods in testing asynchronous code in Jest, which are callbacks, promises, and async/await. So I'm going to first start with telling you or showing you how to test callbacks. So the first thing that we're going to do is to actually create a basic callback function in here, and let's get started. So right here in sum.js, I'm just going to get rid of all of this, and then what I'm going to do is to just write a very basic function. So this function is just going to, as I said, be a callback function, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do to test it. I'm just going to say function. Let's call it fetch data. And the callback. I'm going to open and close that function. And let's set timeout. I'm going to explain everything that this code does in a bit. So then we're just going to open up that, and now we're going to call back like a result. So for this result, let's just say something like peanut butter, semicolon, and down here I'm going to set it to like, let's say 1000. And now we can just add our semicolon right here. Now let me explain what this code does real quick. So this is a basic, as I said, a basic function, and the name of the function is fetch data. So what all of this does is that it kind of simulates a delayed operation. So like an API call using set timeout, and then it calls a callback with a result. So once the API call has been done, or whatever operation we are doing has been done, then it calls a callback with a result. In this case, the result is peanut butter. So that's what this basic code does. And I'm just going to show you how to test that this code works using Jest right here. Now, before we go straight into testing this, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we're actually exporting this fetch data function so that it can be available in here in the test file. So to do this, we're just going to say module.export equals to fetch data. So now we are exporting fetch data, and when we require it here, this is going to allow us to just use that particular function. Let's get rid of all of this, and now let's just write a basic test file, basic test code that we can use to test this. So let's say test, and let's say, okay, nope, this is not what we want. Let's say the data, something like the data is peanut butter, and then we can say done. This done is very important. Again, I'm going to explain what this code does. Then we're going to open that. Now we're going to write a function. We're going to say callback. We're going to take the data, and right now we're just going to open this function and close it, and we're going to have a try except. So we can say try, open and close that. I'm going to say except data dot to be peanut data, peanut butter. Now we have to call the done. So we have to call this done so Jest knows that we are done with what we're doing. And then down here, the catch. So this is a try catch syntax. Error to catch any error. Then open and close that and say done. Error. That easy. Close this, and then right here, the fetch data is the function that we created right here, fetch data, and then we're going to say callback, and then we're just going to add a semicolon right here like this. Now once again, this is just a basic code that is testing for this, and I'm just going to explain what this does. So first of all, we require this particular fetch data right here from here by just importing this ./sum, which is sum.js, and then we're just giving it a description of what this test is. So we're saying that once this test is run, the data that is being outputted should be peanut data. You write whatever you want to write here. This is just a basic description. So yes, and now what we're just doing is to specify done. And once we have this callback function right here, once we say we're trying, and remember the matches to be and accept, so accepting the data, and we're saying it should be peanut butter. And once we are done with that, we need to add a done parameter, which we did right here. So we need to add that done parameter because it is used for callbacks. That's what we did here. But now we also need to specify it here. It's important in calling that done function to signal to Jest that the test is complete. So that's what we did right here, and that's also what we did right here. So now we're just going to go ahead and actually test this particular, or run this particular test. So bring up my terminal, and what I'm just going to do is to say npm test. I'm going to hit enter, and now let's see. So it says one test failed, and let's see why the test has failed. This is because it says reference except is not defined. So let's go back and see why. This is expect, not accept. Now let's run that again. And now everything should be working fine. Good. As you can see, it says pass right here, which is what we need. And it says the data is peanut data, which is good. There's one passed, one total. So the amount of tests we ran was 1, and out of that one was passed. This is the time it used to run that test. So everything is working successfully now in testing for callbacks. Now we are going to be testing for promise-based functions. So without wasting any time, let's just get into it. So let's close down this terminal. And we're going to come back into sum.js. We'll change this name to whatever we want, but let's just leave it at sum.js. And what we're going to do now is to, as I said, test for promise-based functions. So the first thing we need to do is to first write, we're going to introduce a function that returns a promise which resolves after a delay. So let's do that right now. So once again, get rid of all of this right here. And then I'm just going to say function. Let's just name it fetch promise. And then we're going to open and close that function. And we're going to say return new promise. So once again, should have a basic knowledge of JavaScript to be able to follow along with this tutorial, because this is for people that already know JavaScript and want to learn how to test their JavaScript code. So we're going to say resolve reject. And so this resolve and reject just shows that it can be resolved and also rejected. And I'm going to show you how we test for both, if it's resolved or rejected. Now what we're going to do is, when I close that, I'm just going to set timeout. This. Then we're going to resolve. Let's just give it the same thing we gave the last code. We're going to say peanut butter. Say 1000. That. And right here, we're going to have the semicolon also. Now this is the basic code. As I said, this is just a basic, a basic function that returns a promise. And as I said, it resolved after a delay. So now what we're just going to do is to make sure that we export this out so that it can be used in our test file. So module.export equals to fetch promise semicolon. Now we're going to come and test this. For us to test it, once again, the first thing we need to do is get rid of all of this. And let's just say const, we're going to say fetch promise equals to require so don't allow. We're just going to say /sum. And now we're going to write the test. So we're going to say test. This is actually quite straightforward. Test. The data is peanut butter. And right here, we're going to open and close. Do the same here. And now we're going to return. So we're going to say expect fetch promise. So we're expecting our fetch promise dot resolves. So if everything works fine, to be, we're using the to be matcher, and we expect it to be what it is right here, peanut butter. So peanut butter. And we're going to add our semicolon. Now let's save this, and what we're just going to do is, let's make sure we have our semicolon right here. This is basically what we need. And let me just pop this up and run npm test. Now let's see what happens. It should be passed. As you can see, it says passed. This is because everything works successfully. Once, if this is resolved right here, it gives us peanut butter. That happens. But now, let's just assume that fetch promise can also reject, because of course it can resolve or reject. Now let's add a test for if it rejects. So say test, the fetch fails with an error, something like that. And then we're just gonna do the same syntax, and we're just gonna say return expect fetch promise. We're gonna say dot reject. Now we're gonna say dot to throw. Remember when we talked about it to throw matcher for if there is an error? Now we're using that right here, and then we're just gonna say error right here. So right here is the way we can write test for if the data, so let's just spell this correctly, the data is successfully resolved or if the data is rejected. So this is the basic way we can just, as I said, write tests for promises, for functions that uses promises. So it helps handling resolved and rejected promises respectively. Now I'm going to show you how to test with async await. Now we don't even need to write any new function right here. We already have an asynchronous function right here. So we don't really need to write any new function. I'm just going to show you how to use async await to test this promise function that we have right here. So what I'm just going to do is to come back in here, clear all of this. I'm going to leave this out so we don't need to rewrite that. And I'm just going to write the code out, and then I'm going to explain it to you in detail because this is very crucial for you to understand. So the first thing I'm just going to do is to write a new test just as we've been doing. We're just going to say not this test, the data is peanut butter. And now we're going to say async. So async just basically signifies, make sure we're writing that well. It basically signifies that this is an asynchronous function. That's what async does. And now we're just going to open that up, and we're going to say const data equals to await. So await is used in tandem, is used in is used alongside async. So when you say async, you should write await right here. This just means that we are waiting for the promise to resolve before making any assertions. So what we're just going to do is to say fetch promise and expect data, and then we're going to use the to be matcher peanut butter right here, and then we do this. So this is just what we need to basically test this out. And what I'm going to do is to explain, as I said, in detail what this does. So first I'm going to talk about this async right here. So as I said, it signifies, once we have this async function, async keyword before the actual function, it signifies that this function is going to be asynchronous. So it's like a signal to JavaScript that the function can pause and resume at some point, and especially to wait for asynchronous operations to complete. That's what that does. And in testing, this is very useful for handling promises returned by the code that you're testing. So as you can see, we use that to handle this fetch promise function. Now let's talk about this await. Now this await is a keyword that is used alongside async. So when you use await before a function or a promise, what you are just saying is that you're telling JavaScript to wait till that promise settles and returns its result. Now what we need to do is to understand what this await does. So it's used, as I said, to pause the test until the asynchronous function resolves. So when we say this await, is going to pause the test. The test is not going to go on until we get a result or this promise function is being resolved. So that is what that helps us to do. And this async await, it basically just leads to more readable and cleaner test code. And that is why we use this most of the time. And I'm just going to run this and show you that it works. So I'm just going to say npm test. And right here, you should see it says passed. That works successfully, and that is how to use async await in testing. Now let's talk about mock functions and spies in testing. So in unit testing, isolating the components being tested is very crucial, and this is where mocking and spying comes in. So mocks are fake implementations of real functions, and spies are tools that are used to track the behavior of those functions. So they track behaviors such as whether a function has been called, or how many times it has been called, or with what arguments the function was called with. Now, as I said, mocking is used to isolate the unit of code being tested. So it basically allows you to replace a complex or slow or unavailable dependency with simpler versions. And this isolation prevents tests from being affected by external factors and makes them more reliable and faster to execute. So let me give you an example of why and when we can use this. So I'm going to give you an example of like a database call. So paint this scenario. Imagine you have a function that calls a database. Now testing this function could be problematic because it involves network calls, database setup, and stuff like that. But by mocking the database call, we can simulate its behavior and focus solely on testing the function's logic. Now this is why testing using mocking and spies is very important. Now let's create and implement mock functions using Jest. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is to use jest.fn. So jest.fn is a way of creating a mock function, and it can be implemented to return a specific value or perform a specific action. Now let me just show you what I'm talking about. So right here in sum.test.js, I'm going to remove all of this, and I'm just going to write const, let me just say something like mock callback equals to jest.fn. Now we're creating a mock function by saying jest.fn. And let's just say x equals 42 plus x. So as you can see, this is a basic function, and let's say I call this by saying mock callback and I give it 0. Now, if you understand JavaScript, you know that this is just going to say 0 is equals to x. So that means 42 plus 0 is equals to x. So the new value of x will be 42. If I do the same and say callback 1, now this is just going to be 42 plus 1, which is 43. Now this is just a basic way that we just created a mock function, but now I'm going to show you how to test for a mock function by using Jest. So I'm just going to get rid of all of this real quick, and I'm actually going to write a real test now. I'm going to say, let's remove that, and let's give it a description. And the description will be something like mock implementation. So this is just like a mock implementation, let's say, of a basic function. And now that function, just write this out, and that function open and close. And now we're just going to create that same 42 plus x that we created initially, and I'm just going to say const. So as you can see right here, we're not actually doing anything with the sum.js because we don't really need to do anything here. I'm just showing you how to implement a mock function right here. So we're just going to say mock equals to jest. Now we're going to use jest.fn, and now we're going to say x is 42 plus x. As I said, this is a very basic function. What we're just going to do is going to return 42 plus whatever value that we give it, is basically what we want. So now the next thing that we just need to do is to say expect mock, and if we call 1, we expect it to be .to-be 43. So what this is just saying is that if we call this mock right here and give it a value of 1 or argument of 1, what should be returned, or the value that we should get, should be 43. And that is because once we give it 1, it adds that 1 to 42, and it should be 43. So let's make sure this is 43. Give the semicolon, and for now let's just save this, and I'm just going to pull this up, and right here what we just need to do is to say npm test. Now when we say npm test, just as you can see, it says 1 passed, 1 total. right? Now, this is just a very basic way of using mock functions, but we're going to do one more thing. I'm going to introduce to you to have been called with. So it's kind of like another method. We haven't talked about this method before. I'm going to show you what this does right here. So it's going to, let's just say right here, I'm going to say expect mock dot to have been called with h1. Now let's also add this semicolon here. Now this statement, what it just does is that it checks that the mock function was called with the correct argument. So if this assertion failed, then just to provide an error message indicating what went wrong. So what we're just doing is to make sure that we call this with 1, because we did call it with 1 right here. We said mock 1. So this is just saying we're checking that mock should have been called with 1. We're just going to do the same thing that we did, run npm test, and everything should also work successfully. Nothing went wrong. So this is just a very basic way of using mock function for testing right here in Jest. It's very easy, it's very straightforward. Now I'm going to show you how to use jest.spy on in Jest. So we're going to use it to spy, as I explained earlier in this tutorial. Now what we're just going to do is right here in sum.test.js, I'm just going to go straight to writing this test. I'm going to say test, not this. I'm going to say spying on a method of an object. And we're going to create that right now. And we're just going to say equals this. And we're going to create this. And we're going to say const video equals to. We're going to open that up and say play. Now we're going to open this play function up to just say return true right here. And now we're just going to hit a comma, and right here we're going to add our semicolon. Now we're going to add jest.spy on, and why we're adding jest.spy on is basically like tracking this particular video right here. So we want to track and see if this play has been called in this video. So what we're just going to do right here is to say const spy equals jest.spy on. We say video, and we're going to spy on play. Write that, and we're going to say video dot play, open and close, and add the semicolon. And now we're going to say expect spy dot to have been called. And what we're just going to say is spy dot mock restore. Now this is just a basic test that we're writing to track. So let's get rid of this. Now we're writing to track and make sure that this, and track if this play has been, display function has been called right here. And that's what we're just doing, is we're saying const spy, we're saying jest.spy on. So this jest.spy on is just a method to track calls to video.play. So we're tracking when this video.play has been called. And jest.spy on, this spy on right here, it does not replace the functions implementation, unlike jest.fn that we talked about earlier. So this allows us to observe the function's real behavior. Now what we're just going to do is to just go ahead and run this, and it's going to save this, and then pop up the terminal, and right here we're just going to say npm test. Just going to hit enter. So let's go back to terminal and hit enter. As you can see, it says 1 passed, so that means it has been done successfully. So as you can see, everything works. And let me just quickly explain this, because we didn't talk about this. So expect spy dot to have been called with, so this line will check if the play method was called. So this basically validates the spies functionality that we created. So that's what this to have been called with does. And the last thing we're going to talk about is this spy.mock restore function. So this spy.mock restore function in Jest is used to restore the original implementation of that function. So the function that has been spied on using jest.spy on this, that is what is being used to restore the original implementation of that function. Now, when we create a spy on a function, Jest basically replaces the spied function with a mock function. Now, this allows you to like track calls, arguments, and return values of that function. But in some cases, you might want to revert the function back to its original implementation. That is why we use spy.mock restore, and that is what we did right here. So that is the end of this tutorial, and I hope you understood everything we did in this tutorial. If you did, please don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.